Every deep thinker carries a silent curse. It's not intelligence itself that isolates them, but the way they see the world in layers, each layer revealing a truth that most people would rather ignore. They don't just think, they dissect. Every smile, every word, every motive, they see beneath it. And while most find comfort in simplicity, deep thinkers find torment in clarity. Because when you see through everything, almost nothing feels real anymore. You've probably noticed this in yourself if you've ever walked into a room and instantly felt the emotional temperature, how one person's forced laughter clashes with another's quiet resentment. Most people just feel awkward vibes. You, however, start tracing where they come from, the tension between the two friends, the subtle power dynamic, the things left unsaid. You can't turn it off. That's the curse. But here's the Machiavellian truth. What most people see as a burden, the strategist sees as a weapon. Deep thinking isn't about endless contemplation. It's about control. When you can see 3 layers deeper than others, you stop reacting to the world and start shaping it. That's the real psychology of deep thinkers. They live in a reality where every observation can become leverage and every silence can become strategy. Yet, it starts painfully. The first phase of deep thought is alienation. You begin questioning everything, your habits, your beliefs, your desires, and then you realize most of them were never really yours. They were borrowed, fed to you by culture, family, authority. And when you start rejecting them, you create a distance between yourself and the world. People say you've changed, but you haven't. You've just stopped pretending. Machiavelli would say that this is the moment when thought becomes power, when the mind no longer accepts appearances at face value. You begin to analyze motives, question loyalties, predict behavior. You stop believing people's words and start studying their incentives. This is where most stop, because the moment you begin to see too much, you also start losing innocence. You notice that love often hides control, generosity hides vanity, morality hides weakness, and you wonder if everything has a shadow, can anything be pure? That's the dangerous point where thinking becomes self-destructive. But Machiavelli would tell you, don't retreat, use it. Instead of despairing at human nature, master it. If people are driven by self-interest, learn how to align their interests with yours. If emotion blinds judgment, learn to remain calm while others panic. The deep thinker doesn't reject the flaws of humanity. He weaponizes his understanding of them. The modern world doesn't reward that kind of mind anymore. It celebrates quick opinions, not deep reflection, noise, not insight. But Machiavelli would laugh at that, because in a world addicted to impulsive reaction, the one who can stay still, who can think before acting, holds absolute power. You see this everywhere. The most composed person in the argument wins, not because they're right, but because they control tempo. The one who pauses, who chooses silence deliberately, commands attention. Deep thinkers understand this intuitively. They see the psychological rhythm of every interaction. Think of it like chess. Most people play emotionally. They react to the last move. Deep thinkers study patterns. They don't just see what's on the board. They see the player, the fear in their timing, the arrogance in their risk. And by understanding that, they can predict the next move long before it's made. Machiavelli would say that power belongs to those who think 5 steps ahead, not those who move first. But the cost of this awareness is loneliness. Deep thinkers often find it hard to connect because their conversations cut too deep, too fast. They can't talk about the weather without wondering why the person brought it up. They can't enjoy small talk without analyzing its purpose. And when they do speak their mind, they're often misunderstood. People mistake depth for coldness, reflection for detachment. But here's what Machiavelli would point out. Being misunderstood is not a failure, it's protection. When others can't quite read you, they can't quite control you either. The less predictable your mind appears, the more others hesitate to manipulate it. Mystery becomes your armor. There's a quiet strength in being the observer, the one who watches without rushing to act. Because while the impulsive burn out in conflict, the deep thinker endures. They collect data from chaos. They see patterns where others see coincidence. And when they finally decide to act, it's surgical. One precise decision that looks effortless but has been forming quietly in the background for weeks. But this depth has another side. The internal world of the deep thinker is often chaotic. Their mind never stops negotiating with itself. Every decision becomes a moral argument, every emotion a potential trap. They're not only analyzing others, they're dissecting themselves. Why did I react that way? What did that reveal about me? They replay conversations, not out of regret, but curiosity. And while this introspection can lead to mastery, it can also become paralysis. Machiavelli would warn against that. Thought without action is impotence. Reflection must lead to strategy. He would tell the deep thinker, if your insight doesn't change your behavior, it's wasted energy. The goal isn't to think endlessly, it's to think effectively. And here lies the paradox. The deeper the mind goes, the more detached it risks becoming from the raw simplicity of living. When you see every angle, you lose the ability to just exist in one, to feel without analyzing it, to trust without predicting betrayal. Machiavelli would say this detachment is both a strength and a vulnerability. The wise must sometimes pretend to be foolish. The thinker must sometimes act unaware, because if others sense your constant analysis, they'll guard themselves. The art lies in hiding your depth behind ease. The more normal you appear, the freer you are to observe. This is why truly deep thinkers rarely show their full intelligence. They let others underestimate them. It's the safest position in any room. When people believe they're smarter than you, they reveal everything. Their ego becomes your source of information. You stay quiet, nod, let them feel superior, and they hand you the truth without realizing it. That's how a deep thinker survives in a shallow world. Yet sometimes the thinker grows tired of the game. They crave someone who understands without needing explanation, someone who doesn't flinch at silence. But such people are rare because most minds operate at the surface. They seek entertainment, not meaning. And so the deep thinker returns to solitude, not because they hate people, but because shallow connection hurts more than loneliness. Machiavelli might say solitude is where power is refined. When you're alone, your thoughts stop being reactions and start becoming creations. You stop echoing the world and start defining it. Still, thinking deeply doesn't always feel powerful. Sometimes it feels heavy. You wake up analyzing before you've even spoken. You sense the undercurrent of every interaction. You can't rest in ignorance, even if you try. But there's a strange peace in that, too. Because while others live on borrowed ideas, you live in clarity. You may be alone, but you are awake. And Machiavelli would argue that awareness, even painful, is preferable to blindness. Because control over yourself begins the moment you see yourself completely. Your fears, your vanity, your manipulations. A shallow man hides his flaws. A deep one uses them. The psychology of deep thinkers is not that they think more. It's that they see further. They understand that every mind operates from a mixture of desire and fear. They see how ambition disguises insecurity, how confidence hides doubt, but most importantly, they recognize it in themselves. That's what separates them from intellectual pretenders. Deep thinkers don't just analyze others, they study their own corruption, their own capacity for manipulation, their own hypocrisy. They are aware of the Machiavellian traits within them, and instead of denying them, they master them. They know when to show empathy and when to withdraw it, when to speak truth and when silence holds more weight. And in this balance between insight and control lies their quiet dominance. Because while most people reveal themselves completely to be liked, deep thinkers reveal only fragments to be understood. They live like chess masters among gamblers, both playing the same game, but with entirely different stakes. But there's something else, something even Machiavelli might not say outright. The deepest thinkers don't think for the sake of control alone. They think to survive in a world that punishes sensitivity. To feel deeply in an unthinking world is dangerous. And so they armor their hearts with intellect, turning pain into perception, loneliness into clarity, rejection into philosophy. They don't become cold because they were born that way. They become cold because they've burned before. And that's why, paradoxically, behind the analytical calm of a deep thinker, there's always a quiet longing to find a space where they don't have to hide how much they notice. Because seeing everything isn't the gift it seems. It's the slow realization that ignorance really is bliss, and that understanding people deeply means forgiving them constantly. That's the hidden burden Machiavelli understood. Knowledge isolates, but it also liberates. To think deeply is to live with awareness, and awareness, though heavy, is the only true form of power. The more you see, the harder it becomes to act without overthinking. Deep thinkers are cursed with seeing every possible outcome before making a move, and that awareness slows them down in a world that worships speed. But Machiavelli would say speed is meaningless if it leads to error. A ruler who rushes to act is ruled by impulse. A ruler who pauses to think is ruled by reason. The deep thinker's hesitation isn't weakness, it's calculation. They weigh what others overlook. They consider not just the immediate reward, but the chain of reactions it will trigger. Every word spoken, every silence kept, it's all a decision with consequence. Still, this habit of endless analysis can trap them. You start living in simulations of what could happen instead of what's happening. You become so aware of possibilities that certainty feels impossible. Machiavelli's answer to this dilemma was ruthless clarity. Once you've gathered enough information, act. A thinker who never moves becomes food for those who do. Deep thinking is power only when it ends in execution. Until then, it's just potential energy. You see, deep thinkers are like architects. They design the building in their mind long before it's ever built. But the world doesn't reward the architect who keeps redrawing the plan. It rewards the one who lays the first brick. That's the balance most fail to find. Thinking deeply enough to outsmart chaos, but not so deeply that you drown in it. Machiavelli understood something modern psychology still struggles to express, that thinking itself can be both armor and poison. It shields you from manipulation, but it can also suffocate you with awareness. When you see the hidden agenda behind every smile, the social game behind every friendship, the survival instinct behind every virtue, it becomes difficult to trust anyone or anything. The world begins to look like one long negotiation. You stop speaking freely because you're too aware of how words can be used against you. You stop trusting kindness because you've seen how often it hides control. That's when deep thought becomes isolation disguised as wisdom. But there's another path, a higher form of mastery that Machiavelli quietly hinted at in his observations. True depth isn't about avoiding corruption, it's about learning to move through it, untouched. You can swim in the dirt of human motives and still keep your mind clean. The deep thinker who reaches this level stops fighting what is. They no longer expect honesty from the dishonest or depth from the shallow. Instead, they adapt. They read the room without judging it. They accept the world as it is, and that acceptance becomes their freedom. Think about this. Shallow minds crave peace through ignorance. Deep minds find peace through understanding. They stop demanding that people be good. They simply learn how to deal with them as they are. That's the shift Machiavelli would call strategic detachment. You stop being shocked by betrayal, flattery, or greed. You stop labeling them as evil, you simply recognize them as constants. The world becomes less emotional, more mechanical, predictable. That's where deep thinkers gain real advantage. The irony is that many people claim to be deep thinkers, but they're really just chronic overanalyzers drowning in emotion. True depth isn't in overthinking, it's in understanding the purpose behind your thoughts. A real deep thinker doesn't obsess over details that lead nowhere. They think in layers. What is the visible event? What is the hidden motive? What is the root cause? And how can this knowledge serve my goals? It's a structured kind of depth, not endless mental noise. That's why Machiavelli's lessons resonate so much with genuine deep thinkers. He understood that human psychology, stripped of illusion, is the most powerful tool a person can wield. If you understand how people desire, you can direct them. If you understand what they fear, you can control them. And if you understand yourself, your pride, your weakness, your hunger, you become immune to external manipulation. You stop being a puppet of your own emotions. Deep thinkers also carry another trait that Machiavelli valued above all: foresight. They're always living slightly in the future. When someone says something, they're already predicting how it might be used later. When they enter a new environment, they're reading alliances, hierarchies, vulnerabilities. Most people react to what is. Deep thinkers respond to what will be. It's not paranoia, it's perception stretched through time. But there's a fine line between foresight and fear. The deeper your mind sees, the easier it is to anticipate betrayal, disappointment, failure. You begin to feel danger in every direction. And when you live expecting harm, you stop fully living. Machiavelli's remedy to this is brutal but true. Assume betrayal, but still act. Expect manipulation, but still engage. Don't let awareness turn into withdrawal, because if you isolate completely, you remove yourself from the very stage where your intelligence could shine. That's why the most powerful deep thinkers are never hermits. They may retreat often, but they always return to the arena. They observe from the shadows, not to escape the game, but to re-enter it better prepared. They watch people fight over illusions, and when the dust settles, they pick up the truth that everyone ignored. You'll notice that deep thinkers are often the calmest in crises. When chaos erupts, others panic because their reality is being rewritten. The deep thinker, however, saw it coming. They saw the signs, the inconsistencies, the growing tension, the unspoken resentment, and mentally prepared for it long before it happened. That's why their silence feels intimidating. It's not emptiness, it's calculation. But that same calmness often makes others uneasy. People fear what they can't read. They sense something impenetrable in your eyes, something that doesn't react the way they expect. Machiavelli would call that the aura of unpredictability, the most effective form of psychological dominance. When people don't know what you're thinking, they project their own fears into the silence. And that fear gives you control without saying a word. Still, this control comes at a cost. Deep thinkers rarely experience the simplicity of spontaneous joy. Every moment feels like data. Every relationship feels like a test of perception. You can't simply be, because your mind insists on decoding everything. You see patterns even where there are none. It's both genius and madness. Machiavelli would remind you, though, that even madness has its uses. The world often mistakes complexity for instability, and sometimes that misjudgment becomes a mask. Let them underestimate your calm. Let them misread your silence. That confusion is power. In truth, the mind of a deep thinker is a battlefield. One side seeks control, the other connection. One side wants to see everything, the other just wants to feel without consequence. Machiavelli's brilliance was in realizing that these two forces can coexist, but only when directed toward a purpose. If you think deeply without purpose, your mind becomes your enemy. If you think deeply with purpose, your mind becomes your weapon. Purpose is the anchor that prevents depth from becoming despair. It's what transforms endless reflection into strategy. The deep thinker who lacks a goal drowns in meaninglessness, but the one who aims their thoughts toward creation, mastery, or influence rises above everyone else. And that's the true secret. The psychology of deep thinkers isn't just about intellect, it's about integration. To know the dark and the light, to analyze people without hating them, to manipulate without losing your humanity, to detach without losing your soul. Machiavelli's philosophy was never about cruelty for its own sake. It was about seeing the world clearly enough to act effectively within it. Deep thinkers embody that same paradox. They are both observers and participants, skeptics and believers, cold and compassionate. And when all their inner noise finally settles, they realize something profound. Depth isn't about thinking more than others. It's about seeing what others refuse to see and staying sane while doing it. At some point, a deep thinker stops being fascinated by their own thoughts and starts mastering them. That's when they evolve from philosophers to tacticians. They stop asking, "Why is this happening?" and start asking, "What can I do with this knowledge?" That's the Machiavellian transformation, from reflection to application, from curiosity to influence. You can always tell when someone hasn't made that leap. They speak endlessly about ideas, but their life remains chaotic. They can deconstruct everything except themselves. But the real deep thinker, the dangerous one, uses their understanding to reorganize their inner world. They don't waste their intelligence debating illusions. They use it to reprogram their instincts. They observe how emotion drives thought, how thought shapes behavior, and they reverse engineer it until they're no longer at the mercy of either. That's the highest form of self-control, and it's exactly what Machiavelli valued most: the ability to rule the kingdom within before trying to rule anything beyond it. And when that happens, something strange occurs. You start seeing life like a game of probabilities instead of personal dramas. You stop saying, "This person betrayed me," and start saying, "That was statistically inevitable given their incentives." You stop thinking, "They don't respect me," and start thinking, "They no longer find value in fearing me." It's not cynicism, it's calibration. You stop emotionalizing what can be understood logically. That's also when detachment stops being loneliness and becomes power, because now you're no longer desperate for belonging. You interact with people without depending on them for meaning. You listen more than you speak. You reveal less than you know, and suddenly your presence starts unsettling those who rely on validation to feel secure. They can't read you. They can't provoke you. They can't use you. And that quiet self-possession, that stillness under pressure is what Machiavelli would call the art of invisibility. You begin to understand that attention is currency, and you stop spending it recklessly. You learn to stay bored in conversations that offer no insight, calm in chaos that demands a reaction, and detached in arguments that crave your outrage. Because every time you withhold your attention, you're reminding the world that your energy is valuable. That's the unspoken language of deep thinkers. They don't compete for validation. They make others compete for their focus. But underneath this composure, there's a subtle danger. The deeper you think, the more temptation you have to play God, to manipulate outcomes just because you can. You start seeing how easily people can be nudged, persuaded, misdirected. And when you realize how fragile perception is, power becomes seductive. You might justify it at first. "I'm just testing something," or "I'm only protecting myself." But Machiavelli warned that manipulation without restraint turns wisdom into tyranny. The same depth that gives you foresight can also give you arrogance. You start believing that because you understand people, you're above them. That's when you begin losing the very clarity that made you powerful in the first place. That's why the greatest deep thinkers, those who survive their own intelligence, balance intellect with restraint. They know when to stop analyzing, when to stop predicting, when to stop playing games. Because at a certain point, thinking too much stops adding precision. It starts adding distortion. You start projecting your own complexity onto simple things, creating illusions out of thin air. You start doubting sincerity that might actually be real. You stop trusting joy because it seems too effortless. The mind becomes suspicious of peace. So the final stage of deep thinking isn't control, it's surrender. Not to ignorance, but to acceptance. You start realizing that not everything needs decoding, not every silence hides meaning, and not every motive deserves scrutiny. You learn to let life exist without dissecting it. That's not stupidity, it's maturity. Because wisdom isn't just the ability to see deeply, it's the ability to stop when you've seen enough. And ironically, that's when the deep thinker finally becomes free. When your thoughts no longer own you, your awareness no longer isolates you, and your insight no longer feels like a burden. You can still read people, but you no longer need to. You can still predict outcomes, but you're not obsessed with being right. You can still analyze motives, but you choose compassion over suspicion. That's the final evolution Machiavelli hinted at, the thinker who uses power without losing peace. Deep thinkers eventually realize that all their analysis, all their introspection, all their mental warfare was never about understanding others. It was about understanding themselves. Every lie they caught, every manipulation they decoded, every illusion they exposed was just a mirror showing them what they were capable of becoming. Because at the core of every deep thinker lies a dangerous truth. The mind that sees through others must also see through itself. And once you do, you begin to notice how rare it is to meet someone who has done the same. You can feel it immediately, the groundedness in their gaze, the absence of pretense, the quiet mind that doesn't need to prove itself. You recognize each other without words. It's like two mirrors reflecting the same stillness. There's no competition, no performance. Just understanding. That's what the deep thinker secretly longs for. Not admiration, not followers, not power, but resonance. But even if that never comes, it doesn't matter. Because once you master your own depth, you no longer need to be seen to feel seen. You carry your own clarity like armor. You stop explaining your silence, your solitude, your detachment. You stop defending your difference. The world will always misinterpret depth as coldness, but those who live in that depth know it's not cold. It's clear, it's calm, it's alive. And that's the Machiavellian truth about the psychology of deep thinkers. They are not dreamers lost in thought. They are silent strategists, sculpting their minds against a world that mistakes reflection for weakness. They live between intellect and instinct, solitude and influence, detachment and empathy. They walk through chaos with steady eyes, not because they don't feel, but because they feel everything and still choose to stay in control. The surface may see silence, but beneath it there's motion, a mind that never stops mapping, measuring, understanding. Not to escape life, but to master it. That's what it means to think deeply, not to see more than others, but to understand more deeply what you see.